Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my videos, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our last episode, we discussed how Rimuru sent Primordial White, Tensura, to issue a final warning to the Eastern Empire troops. However, Lieutenant General Gaster of the Empire's Magitank Corps dismissed Tensuro's words and commanded his forces to launch an attack on the Monster Federation troops, thereby officially declaring war between the two nations. In this episode, we will delve into the battles involving Gobta and Gabiru, as well as the amusing misunderstanding by the Empire that identifies Gabiru as the Storm Dragon Veldora. Of course, we will also touch upon the determination of Rimuru's subordinates, who are prepared to protect Rimuru at all costs. Let's get started. As the enemy crossed the line drawn by Tensura, signaling the start of the war, Gaster gave the order, and 20 Magitanks of the Eastern Empire's army opened fire simultaneously, launching a barrage at Gobta's Goblin riders. Gobta's troops swiftly responded, using shadow motion to hide within shadows, successfully avoiding the initial salvo. In line with the battle plan set by the Monster Federation's Supreme Commander Rimuru, Gobta's Goblin riders were to coordinate with Gabiru's Flying Dragon group, Hiryu. While Gabiru staged a feint attack on the enemy, Gobta's squad would seize the moment to strike. 15 minutes later, Gobta led a charge. Undaunted by the guns aimed his way, he and his riders braved through a storm of bullets to confront the front line of tanks. Following this, Gobta exchanged a glance with Gobchi, who quickly understood and hurled a red glowing gem at the tank battlements. This was the Flame Burst Gem, crafted by Kurobe and Cherries, imbued with magical power, effectively a bomb in modern parlance. The Flame Burst Gem entered the barrel of a tank, igniting a high-powered explosion from within, sending metal shrapnel flying, and easily destroying the tank. The sight bolstered the morale of the Goblin riders, who continued according to plan, penetrating deeper into enemy territory to directly strike at the command center. Lieutenant General Gaster glared irritably at the approaching Gobta and his comrades. The tank explosion had shaken him, but as a distinguished commander, he quickly regained his composure, determined to make these smug monsters regret their audacity. Amidst the chaos, Gaster instructed his soldiers to stay calm and observe the enemy's actions, rationalizing that only one tank had been destroyed without follow-up, indicating a scarce supply of bombs, their trump card. This calm deduction, however, was completely wrong. The Goblin riders had more than enough flame burst gems to destroy all tanks. Their restraint was merely due to the absence of further orders, and the wish of Supreme Commander Rimuru to capture the enemy tanks intact. Yet, it was this misjudgment that restored Gaster's composure. Watching Gobta's troops preparing to penetrate deeper towards the command center, Gaster commanded the left wing to engage with a concentrated air battle formation. Moments later, hundreds of tanks mobilized, tightly arranging themselves to block the Goblin riders' path. The tank battalion began to move, seemingly encircling Gobta's squad, forming a formidable fortress, with mounted machine guns initiating a barrage of fire, sealing off the Goblin riders' prized high-speed maneuvers. Gobta felt a sense of foreboding. The current situation was no longer about attack strategies. Seeing his comrades under fire from the Empire's troops made even Gobta anxious. In such a siege, the sheer number became a decisive advantage. In this crisis, another unfavorable event unfolded for the Tempest forces. The Empire's Flying Combat Corps appeared on the scene, launching magical disturbing rays at the monsters. This inflicted great pain on Gabiru's airborne troops, causing the situation to flip in an instant. By this point, Rimuru, monitoring the situation from the Strategic Command Center, quickly contemplated a retreat command, but it was slightly late. Under the wide-reaching magical interference, shadow motion became unusable, and Gobta and his team could only retreat by running, dashing at full speed towards the forest. Gobta, visibly agitated, shouted to his companions, urging them to sprint towards the safety of the trees. But with enemies on both sides, this retreat would prove exceptionally arduous. Watching Gobta and his team flee, Gaster's face twisted into a cruel smile, but it soon turned to fury, for before him, Tensura remained with a serene expression, unaffected by the surrounding hail of bullets that seemed to pose no threat to her at all. Gaster's visage twisted grotesquely with malevolence, his ego bruised by the stunning beauty Testarossa, who dared to disregard his might, a slight he could not forgive. Determined, he resolved to transform Testarossa's beauty into a visage marred by terror. Such was the dark, twisted man that Gaster had become. Under the commander's unyielding orders, the remaining 2,000 tanks began to pivot, spewing flames in unison, rendering the scene even more horrific. Rimuru, who had been vigilantly monitoring the battle from the command center, rose from his chair upon witnessing the carnage. Despite anticipating casualties, the reality of the situation incensed Rimuru, who had hoped his naivety about the cost of war wouldn't be proven so bitterly true. However, Benimaru urged Rimuru to maintain his composure, assuring him that the losses were still within the expected parameters. Yet, Rimuru couldn't rein in his emotions at the sight of the fallen. Such sacrifices were intolerable to him. He questioned why his divine power, the fury of God Megiddo, wasn't employed against the enemy. It was in his ire that Rimuru recalled the conclusion they had reached earlier: Megiddo's principle, to condense sunlight into a beam of ultra-high temperature capable of inflicting immense damage to living beings, had clear drawbacks. Once the magic was known, it was easily countered. Dust clouds, for instance, would significantly diminish its precision and potency. Furthermore, facing Magitanks forged of solid iron, a mere beam of light, even one potent enough to pierce through, would cause very limited damage to the soldiers. At this juncture, Shuna interjected, soothing Rimuru by suggesting that Megiddo, a spell of sublime beauty, should be reserved for a decisive moment. She reminded him that safeguarding the nation was a duty shared by all subordinates, who must not let Rimuru bear the burden alone. Her words tempered Rimuru's impulse, yet he remained adamant about minimizing casualties, proposing to lead the charge himself. This proposition was swiftly vetoed by the Supreme Commander, Benimaru. They could not permit their sovereign to be exposed to dangers, especially with intelligence from Chloe hinting at other timelines where Rimuru faced assassinations. Given such threats, the idea of Rimuru joining the battle was inconceivable. Subsequently, Soei also indicated that the enemy's combat strength remained unclear, and he was diligently gathering intelligence. He implored Rimuru-sama to await further information with peace of mind, expressing his belief that the Supreme Commander Benimaru and the comrades on the battlefield would surely clinch victory. Upon hearing these reassurances, Rimuru slumped back into his chair, his tension easing. It was only then that he realized, upon learning that there were those who could pose a threat to him, his subordinates had exhaustively devised strategies to avert such a scenario. It was needless to say that Benimaru, Soei, Shuna, and others had made their preparations, but even those who had gone to the battlefield had done so to draw out the unknown threat, using themselves as bait. Even the typically capricious and carefree storm dragon Veldora was now solemnly remaining at Rimuru's side. All that was being done was for the protection of Rimuru. He was the only one not fully aware of the gravity of the situation. In that moment, even the Lord of Wisdom signified her readiness to strive for perfection to protect her Rimuru-sama. Feeling the deep concern of his followers, Rimuru came to a resolution for the sake of his subordinates. After apologizing and explaining that he had momentarily lost his composure, Rimuru commanded Benimaru to convey his words to all the combat personnel. Through Benimaru's unique skill, Commander, Rimuru's directives were conveyed in their entirety to every subordinate. Rimuru ordered his forces to crush the enemy with all their might, holding nothing back and showing no mercy, to unleash their full power without reservation and swiftly annihilate the foe. With Rimuru's instructions, the monster's suppressed strength was unleashed, precipitating a significant shift in the tide of battle. Gabiru was the first to react, his excitement uncontainable upon receiving Rimuru's command. His troops, too, were stirred into a fervor. Given Rimuru-sama's order to exert their full strength, the Flying Dragon group led by Gabiru no longer needed to concern themselves with what would follow. Consequently, every member began to deploy the skill, Dragon Warrior Transformation. As mentioned, Gabiru's forces were merely a decoy to attract the attention of the airships, feigning vulnerability to maintain a state of tension, thereby luring out any entity that could threaten their Rimuru-sama. However, with Rimuru's new orders, there was no longer a need for pretense. The Hiryu, without hesitation, unleashed their true power. Their muscles swelled, the purple scales that covered their skin darkened to black, and their flexibility and hardness increased manifold. Absorbing the surrounding magicules, they began to enlarge, their offensive and defensive capabilities reaching unprecedented levels. This was the Hiryu's hidden trump card, Dragon Body Transformation. Although this skill carried the risk of losing one's self-awareness, their rigorous training had completely mitigated this side effect. Confidently, Gabiru commanded his subordinates to each bring down a ship and follow him into the attack. At Gabiru's command, the Hiryu surged forth in a unified assault, declaring their dominion over the sky, and they launched an offensive against the Flying Combat Corps. In a flash of swords, the Empire's pride, the Flying Combat Corps, were reduced to mere lambs. The reason was clear: the Hiryu, now in their dragon warrior form, were nearly immune to magical attacks. Coupled with their own multiple defensive barriers, even gunfire of a caliber akin to machine guns could not penetrate their scales. Once deemed formidable, the combat airships had met their destined end, for their methods of attack were rendered useless. Gabiru, with a spirit soaring high, brandished the Vortex Spear, a legacy from his father, and unleashed his signature technique, the Vortex Crash. The spinning currents gathered the moisture in the air, creating a massive vortex of magical energy that was released from the spear's tip. It shattered the enemy's defensive barrier, piercing through an entire airship with devastating finality. While the other draconic warriors couldn't launch attacks of similar magnitude, it only took a quintet of them a mere 15 minutes to sink an airship. Thus, as the roles of hunter and prey reversed, the tide of the sky battle was decisively turned. The scene shifted to the Empire's perspective. The spectacle that unfolded rendered Major General Faraga of the Flying Combat Corps utterly astonished. According to the report of the Imperial Intelligence Bureau, there was no question that those before him were the Dragonets, a rare species reputed for possessing the formidable might of humanoid dragons. However, the scene playing out before his eyes had utterly surpassed his understanding. Shocked by Gabiru's prowess and realizing the intelligence provided by the Imperial Intelligence Bureau was nothing but nonsense, Faraga turned to question his assistant, who was equally confused. The stark discrepancy between the reports and the reality threw them into disarray. Before their eyes, the monsters underwent a startling transformation, with their energy levels surging dramatically, even surpassing the standards of Class A. The Empire's military might still be sufficient to cope with this. However, the individual leading the charge possessed an energy level more than 10 times greater than the others, a level of magical power not even the Empire's great mage Gadara could boast of. The assistant noted that there was indeed a record of this individual in the data provided by the Intelligence Bureau, but since he had not participated in the martial tournament held by the Monster Federation, his combat capabilities were unknown. However, it was reported that he had once held an academic conference on herbs, which now appeared to have been a guise to conceal his disaster-class combat abilities. As Faraga watched his subordinates engage in a flurry of discussion, a look of realization crossed his face. Despite the chaos caused by the concealed strength of their opponents, these Dragonets in the intelligence reports were not invincible. The Empire's combat airships were their secret weapon, developed specifically to counter the storm dragon Veldora, equipped with Magicule Disturbance Rays designed to scatter their energy. Though the Magicule Disturbance Ray was already in operation as a preliminary measure, Faraga was convinced that if all the cannons focused and fired at full strength, they could immobilize any monster. His confidence in this strategy was unshakable. Yet, as Gabiru's troops engaged the magically buoyant combat airships, employing the Magicule Disturbance Rays against Gabiru would also doom the airships and their Imperial allies. Nevertheless, Faraga unflinchingly issued the command, resulting in both Hiryu troops and Imperial airships crashing from the sky. Guild nodded at him, but these were necessary sacrifices for victory. Faraga offered silent prayers for his fallen comrades, and upon witnessing the Dragonets plummet, his heart eased slightly. But this respite was short-lived as he noticed the exceptional individual, Gabiru, still hovering midair, seemingly immobilized by the magical disturbance rays yet with barely a dent in his energy reserves. Stunned by this outcome, Faraga could hardly believe that even with over 70 airships employing the magical disturbance rays at full capacity altogether, they had only managed to restrict Gabiru's movement. While continued emission of the rays would undoubtedly weaken Gabiru, the Imperial forces wondered how such a powerful individual could exist. An abrupt thought crossed Faraga's mind, leading to a theory that garnered collective acceptance. He postulated that the monstrous entity before them was none other than the storm dragon Veldora, recently unsealed and weakened to the point of being unable to maintain his dragon form, thus explaining the anomalously high energy readings. His subordinates were stunned, scarcely able to comprehend that the immense power they witnessed was merely a fraction of the storm dragon's might in a weakened state. The mere thought of Veldora's true strength sent shivers of dread through them. Faraga expounded that the terrifying aspect of the storm dragon Veldora was well known to the Imperial army, which had suffered defeat 350 years ago. He had heard of the dragon's formidable presence from his mentor Gadra, and to consider that Veldora retained such power even after 300 years of imprisonment was beyond their wildest imaginations. Hence, Faraga surmised, the annihilation of the Falmouth army by such force was plausible. While most concurred with Faraga's conclusion, skepticism lingered among some. A subordinate highlighted that the records from the Imperial Intelligence Bureau report identified the formidable monster as the dragonet leader Gabiru, not Veldora. However, Faraga dismissed this report, insisting Gabiru was merely an alias, a guise used by Veldora to avoid drawing attention while recovering his full strength. Although the notion of monsters using aliases was unheard of, the officers, swayed by Faraga's conviction, withheld further objections. A sense of gratification spread among them as they believed they had Veldora cornered, immobile. Continuous exposure to the ray might not annihilate him but could induce a physical collapse. The thought of capturing Storm Dragon Veldora, reduced to this vulnerable state, signaled a substantial victory in this operation. Realizing this, a joyful atmosphere permeated the command room as they checked the operational status of their equipment. Yet, their assessment was gravely mistaken, the real battle was just beginning. Alright, that's all for this video. In the next episode we will delve into the story of Primordial Purple Ultima's unilateral decimation of the Imperial forces, as well as the astonishing might of Gobta. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support fuels my continued efforts. See you in the next one.